people are responsible for their own prosperity, and they are capable of their own prosperity. And one of the things that I don't like about Washington right now is on both sides of the aisle, they're real sure they have the answer and they can tell the American people how to go live their lives. And I don't like that a bit. Getting back to letting people prosper and choose their future is exactly the right thing.
Hello, welcome again to another episode on the Let People Prosper show. My name is Dr. Vance Ginn. I hope you're having a prosperous day. Well, today I'm delighted to bring on someone who knows a lot about the budget, regulatory costs, and has been in D.C. for a while, but he still keeps going forward about freedom and liberty and so much more. None other than Douglas Holtz-Eakin. Oh, Doug, welcome to the Let People Prosper show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on. I've been reading and learning from your work for a long time, so it's really a pleasure to have you on. Before we get going too far, though, let me go ahead and read your bio for the audience, and then we'll jump right into it. So right. Douglas Holtz-Eakin is the president of the American Action Forum. Before founding AAF in 2009, Dr. Holtz-Eakin served in a variety of influential policy positions. During 2001-2002, he was the chief economist of the President's Council of Economic Advisors, CEA. From 2003 to 2005, he was the sixth director of the Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, CBO. During 2007 to 2008, he was the director of domestic and economic policy for the John McCain presidential campaign. After that, he was a commissioner on the congressionally chartered Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission. He began his career at Columbia University in 1985 and moved to Syracuse University from 1990 to 2001. At Syracuse, he became a trustee professor of economics at the Maxwell School, chairman of the Department of Economics, and associate director of the Center for Policy Research. A lot of good stuff there, Doug, going in your background and everything else. So, yes. Like I do with every guest, let me go ask you this first question, though. Why do you do what you do every day?
I love it. And I love studying federal policy and trying to understand it more than anything else. It's just this desire to just understand what is going on and to be able to explain it to people and lay out sort of the method to Washington's madness. And that's what I do every day.
Well, it's an uphill battle. There's a lot of madness going on. It's interesting, though, Doug, because you've been with different when there was other presidents involved, George W. Bush, and then with McCain, and now you've seen the Obama administration, you've seen the Trump administration, and so much. What do you think that you've learned the most given your time in Washington, D.C.?
Well, it actually goes back further than that. I first worked in Washington in 1989 and 1990. Again, it was at the Council of Economic Advisors. I was a senior staff economist under George H.W. Bush. So I worked both H.W. and W. So I've worked in two White Houses, the CBO, the McCain campaign. I think the most important lesson I learned in those jobs was to do my job. There is, in fact, this great temptation when you get to D.C. to play politics. It's a political town.
Yeah.
And there are lots and lots of politics going on, and there are lots of politicians around. And as a staffer, there's often this temptation to sort of shade things so that the politically attractive thing looks better and that make your boss happy. And that's a terrible idea.
Yeah.
And I learned that most vividly from George W. Bush. I learned it time and time again with Senator McCain. Your job is to tell them, here are the policy choices, or here's what's going to happen. If you do that, that's a bad idea. Here's the economics of it. They need to know that. They're going to make the political decision they're going to make. You can't change that. They're politicians.
Yeah.
So my challenge is always make good policy, good politics. Then they can just do that. That'd be great. So that's been my adult avocation. But certainly you have to tell them the truth.
Yeah.
The biggest example I have of that is I was in charge of the Farm Bill when I was at the White House in 2001 for reasons that no one should ever try to understand, because I know. And we were trying to get the President's Trade Promotion Authority. And even then, when the Republican-controlled House, 2001, it was an uphill battle. And part of what we needed to do was not upset anybody, because we got TPA ultimately by one vote in that House, Republican-controlled House. And so that included then Ag Chairman Larry Combest from Texas. And the Farm Bill that he was putting together wasn't the administration's favorite. Certainly wasn't what the president wanted. But I was basically told, let it go. We'll fix it in the Senate, and then we'll be fine. of course, we didn't fix it in the Senate. It came over to the White House, and the sort of senior advisors essentially looked at each other and went, wink, wink, nod, nod. We know it's a bad bill. President's got to sign it, so we're not going to say anything. And so, there was none of this sort of senior advisors when polled suggested veto. There is always a process of that type. And it went. And at some point a little bit later, we were in a meeting with the president and something came up and I muttered, well, we don't want another farm bill. And Bush went, wait, what's wrong with the farm bill? And he had this thing when he got unhappy with his finger. He pounded on the table. I signed the farm bill. What's wrong with the farm bill?
Yeah.
And he was pissed. And he should have been. Because he's not going to sit and read the farm bill.
Right.
And if we had done our jobs, we would have said, Mr. President, this is not a good bill. This is not what we set out to accomplish. This is not consistent with your principles. It is what it is. And he said, well, I'm probably going to have to sign it. You guys should know that it's not done. He's the best politician in the land. He's president. We're not.
Yeah.
But we didn't do that. And so we didn't do our job. And I've never forgotten it.
Wow.
He needed to know that.
Yeah. No, that's a really important point. I think it's oftentimes missed, with so many different things that are going on at the White House and these big bureaucracies is you kind of fall into the run of the mill everyday sort of things where you're pushing papers, you're getting policies and everything is on your desk and you got all these meetings going on. And so it's easy to kind of overlook these things. But I think you're bringing up a really good point. One of the things that I was chief economist for the Office of Management and Budget during the first Trump White House from June 2019 to May of 2020 and helped, write the president's last budget as you know about at CEA as part of Troika and everything else there. It was an extraordinary opportunity. As someone who was an academic and worked in public policy for a number of years before I went to the White House, I to be honest, I wasn't prepared. It was like politics on steroids where I came in and I got Russ Vought telling me one thing. I've got all these things going on and I'm like, oh my gosh, what is happening? And so I tried to bring about the best ideas. To your point though, Doug, so I was bringing it around to that. I tried to bring out, here are the trade-offs. I'm not going to agree with everything we're doing on tariffs. I'm a free trade guy. I don't like this direction we're going, but let me get involved more with but I'm going to help out any way I can with that. But here's deregulation. I could definitely get on board with deregulation. What can we do with that? And what can we do with the budget? And all these different things start coming into play where it's almost, I remember a couple months after I was into it, Doug, I was like, man, maybe this isn't the job for me. But then I just put my head down and I was like, man, you know what? I'm here for a reason. I'm going to do something. Did you ever have any of those moments?
Oh, yeah. I mean, among the things that I think almost no one appreciates is that when you work at the White House, it is 24/7 and it's about the president's agenda. Like you are there to support the president's agenda and whatever goes on in the world, you evaluate it through the lens of what does this do to the president and his administration. And it's exhausting. Yeah. It's absolutely exhausting. And so, everyone else is essentially the enemy, right? And that includes Congress. Doesn't matter who controls it; they're the enemy. They just aren't doing what the president wants, and it's a mindset you get into in that building. And so after a couple of years, you're done. I mean, you're just really exhausted by and large. Yeah. And I was in the White House on September 11th, 2001, and the weeks and months that followed that were unrelenting. Yeah. So I certainly had days when I was just, oh my.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I forgot about that. Not to forget about the September 11th, but that you were there. That had to be a wild experience. During my time was when COVID hit. And I remember going to the Situation Room and talking with Larry Kudlow and others and thinking about like, what's this going to do to our economy? How is this going to affect things overall? And, they were asking me about shutdowns. And I was like, basically like, look, I don't think we should be shutting down the economy. I don't think that should be a part of what we're doing right now, but I understand the political ramifications of what that could entail and everything else. Could you share a glimpse of what you saw during the September 11th, 2011? Because of course that's etched into my mind and many of the audience's mind. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts of that though.
So, I'd say some sort of humorous things, right? Yeah. So, the planes hit the towers. I got a phone call. Secret Services said this is a terrorist attack. We're going to have a briefing. I went to the chairman's office, Glenn Hubbard, and we were standing in Glenn's office. I was getting ready to go to the meeting on behalf of CA when the pillar of smoke went up from the Pentagon across the river. We could see out of it, southwest out of his office.
Wow.
And at that point, simultaneously, my phone rang. It was Mark Weinberger, Assistant Secretary for Treasury, saying, Doug, people are running out of the White House. What's going on? At the same time that was happening, the Secret Service ran through the whole screaming, there's a plane coming, run.
Wow.
And so that was the evacuation. And so I exited the building with a guy from the National Security Council, fortunately, because he knew things like blast radius. And he said, we got to keep moving. And I can remember us trying to decide where to go. And it's like, okay, what's there? That's the World Bank. Everyone hates them. I'm not going there. Over there. Oh, that's the Federal Reserve and the State Department. No. Where do we go? We ended up huddling behind a General Services Administration building on 18th Street because who knows the GSA? Yeah. This is to be safe.
Right. Wow. Yeah. And
then we get back. I rendezvoused with Glenn Hubbard in my apartment up on Massachusetts Avenue, and we wrote probably our best memo of our entire time at the White House.
Wow.
Just like, what does this mean? Well, it means that we are going to have to harden the economy against terrorist attacks.
Yeah.
That's going to divert an enormous amount of otherwise productive capital into protection and other activities. We're going to diversify things, and this will produce a great drag on economic growth. And that was the era of the jobless recovery.
Yeah.
Mild recession and CapEx was not very strong. And it was the classic trade-off. You can protect all the headquarter buildings. You can put bollards outside every place in DC, but that's all, time, money, energy going there, not to other things. And it showed up in the economy. It really did. And it was very hard on the president. He didn't like it. So, I was proud of that. We really did our job that day.
Yeah. That's wild. I mean, it's interesting. You think about the time that you're there and kind of believe we were there for that moment, and being in those opportunities, I'm sure has set you forth on many other opportunities throughout your career as you moved into CBO. And I wonder what that was like. Well, how was it at CBO? I mean, you have this nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office and your work of being in the White House before that. How was your time there?
So I was the first CBO director to go directly from the White House to the CBO. And there were many, especially congressional Democrats, who did not think I could do the job because it was required that you be nonpartisan. And they didn't know anything about me. They hadn't spent years reading research papers. All they knew is I was a partisan hack coming over from the White House, probably there to destroy the fabric of the CBO. So I felt doubly important that I do the job well, and that in the end, the proof is always the quality of your work. Yeah, you can say whatever you want, but it's the quality of your work has to show up. And so that's what the task I set for myself. And I had a great time at CBO. When I first showed up, the staff was nervous about me. Yeah, they didn't really know who I was. I was a crazy man. That's an honest scientific assessment. Okay. I was commuting from Syracuse to DC. My family was not in town. Wow. I got up at 5 o'clock every day and I went to the office, and, Glenn Hubbard got up at 5 o'clock. We went to the office. We met at 6 o'clock. He went over to senior staff. That's when my days began. I thought that's when everyone's days began. So when I got to CBO, there was a backlog of papers that hadn't been reviewed and hadn't been published. And so I decided to get through the backlog by holding 7 a.m. meetings on the papers and having come in for the meetings. And after about 6 weeks of this, my secretary, a wonderful woman, Sandra, came in, closed my door, looked at me and goes, "This ends now." Wow. These people have families. They have kids they have to get to school. No more. It was a good thing she did, because it was, I was killing them and I didn't realize it. I was the academic. I'd been to Syracuse, Columbia, but I was the productivity hawk. My feeling was we worked for Congress. We had deadlines. We met those deadlines. Yeah. And I personally would rather be 90% right and on time for the debate than perfect than 2 years late. Yeah. CBO as an institution was very risk averse, and it would have preferred to have been 2 years late and perfect. So I was constantly fighting them to get it done on time, get this done. And at first they really resisted and did not like that. Yeah. But they ultimately came to understand that I enhanced their standing enormously by being on time for these things and having CBO play in the debate. And if there were mistakes, because I had rushed them, I take the bullets.
Yeah.
That's my responsibility. That's all there is to it. And that worked out well. And I ended up loving that job. I love the institution.
Yeah.
There were 230 people there. 190 of them had advanced degrees. There was someone on that floor who knew more about any topic than anyone else in the world. It was like being a kid in a candy store.
Nice. Yeah.
It was just a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And I've always thought back fondly of that job.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's almost like having your own think tank.
It was.
Right. With highly
think tank.
Yeah.
That's how I thought about it.
Yeah.
We were Congress's think tank.
Yeah.
And we need to help our client.
I love it. Yeah, because, within the White House complex, to me, CEA is kind of like a think tank, right?
It is.
You had OMB and CEA and Treasury working together on a lot of things with the Troika and the president's budget and all those things. And so, yeah, that's interesting. Where, right now, Doug, we have this discussion right now going on in DC with the Doge and Elon Musk and talking about the number of federal employees and the number of FTEs and all the things that are going on. And, it's interesting to me, though, to think about it. There certainly are some people who are resistant to the president's demands of what's going on, and I saw that when I was at OMB. But there are also those that have that they have families and that they're there to work and be a civil servant in the process as well. I wonder what some of your thoughts are as you hear maybe some of the not demantling, or I guess some have called it that, but the reductions in the number of FTEs and employees and what's going on in the bureaucracy of government in the federal level. What have been your thoughts on that?
I have real mixed emotions about it. To be honest, I don't think there's any real question that the federal agencies, broadly defined, could stand to be modernized and reformed. Probably the biggest thing is the private sector has gotten rid of a vast swath of middle management whose only job it was to take reports from below and write memos about them to their bosses. Mm-hmm. Information technologies have made that obsolete. You have a big retail footprint, a C-suite gets the data and they make decisions, off they go. And the agencies don't look like that. And there's that needs to happen. And I would love to see that happen. But Doge isn't that.
Yeah.
That it's not that. So I'm not wild about it. Currently, there's another initiative which you probably know about, but the listeners might not, which is the Office of Management Budget has taken the lead on behalf of the president, asking for strategic reduction plans from each of the cabinet secretaries for their agencies. That's the way to do that.
Yeah.
Say, okay, we would like to shrink the footprint. How are we going to do it? Here's who we need, who we don't need. This is the capability we no longer need. Let's move that out. So I have my much higher hopes about that than the sort of Doge across the board, not particularly well thought out cuts. So there's the personnel management aspect of the HR part. There's also the budgetary part, which is, Social Security isn't expensive because it has a lot of employees. Social Security is expensive because it sends out a lot of checks.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I'd never thought trying to get the federal headcount down as a budget strategy made a lot of sense either. So the Doge thing could be quite valuable, but didn't work out that way in its initial incarnation. Now it's doing some other things. We'll see. At some point, I hope they literally modernize the information systems and the technologies, because Lord knows we've seen from the federal student loan program, they can't even get the application form up and running in real time. So there are lots of things that could be better.
Yeah.
And I'd like to see that.
Yeah, definitely. It's also interesting to me too, right? Is that you have Doge coming in, making some cuts here and there, ending contracts, working with different agencies, which I think could be important or at least a process. But ultimately, what we need, though, is Congress is the one that has the power of the purse. So if we're going to make these cuts permanent, Congress has got to get involved.
Yeah, it's that simple. I don't say that from the beginning. It was funny when it first started. Of course, it was outside the government, and reporters would call me and say, "What do you think of Doge?" And I said, "Well, these are well-intentioned people outside the government, watching how the government works, thinking hard about it, and making suggestions how it could do better." Huh. That's called a think tank, and it has no power. I can promise you. I run one.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. That's true.
I think they figured that out, man.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens. I mean, you have these different groups over time and thinking about what should happen within the federal level. And I agree with you. There's probably a room for some increase in productivity, reduction in the number of federal employees that are out there. But how do we make sure that, and I thought this idea of resign, this email that they're sending out, if they resign, I mean, at least it was voluntary in that capacity, which was an interesting way. And I know, within OMB, the first term, there was some direction within the Office of Personnel Management, OPM, of looking at how do you let go of employees, if along the way. And so maybe there needs to be some reforms that are there. But again, I think I'm hopeful that this will be up to Congress to decide what's going on with the budget itself. And another thing here, Doug, is that I'm worried about the issues of the presidency and the executive branch getting too much power. Too much is going into the executive branch now. A big one that we hear a lot about now is tariffs. And, we can debate whether or not tariffs are good. I'm a free trade guy. I don't like tariffs at all. And I have a debate with Peter Navarro and them when I was in there a lot. And, I kind of see where they're coming from, but I just don't think it's a good tool to use to raise taxes on Americans to try to bring others to the table or whatever else. But even if it was, I think it should be up to Congress. Congress should have the power of the purse when it comes to tariffs and to spending, and too much has been given leeway, I think, to the president. But what say you?
I'm with you. I mean,
okay.
Congress has the tariff authority.
Yeah.
And they have ceded this to the president, and I think they should take it back. I mean, I don't like this. Part of what I don't like is that a lot of these authorities are emergency authorities. So we're inventing emergencies and declaring emergencies so that he can levy tariffs. Excuse me. I'm not a fan.
Yeah.
In the end, a tariff is a tax.
Yeah.
And we know the power of taxation. So its power is not to be questioned. The desirable uses of it, in taxes, the desirable uses of it are keep it to a minimum. And, if you said to me, please, let's raise some federal revenue, would I pick a partial federal sales tax that's highly distortionary and regressive? Probably not.
Yeah.
So that's where we are, though. And these are now significant tariffs. I think there's been some misreading of the record from his first presidency and extrapolating from tariffs on China to tariffs on Canada and Mexico. Those are like night and day different.
Yeah.
The North American economy is an integrated entity, and hitting those countries with these tariffs is going to rip things apart in a way that's very damaging to all parties involved. And I would advise against that at all costs.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with you. And, I think, and going back to the first Trump administration, when you had these tariffs that were put in place, the trade deficits didn't decline. Now, they declined some when COVID happened because the economies were closed down. So that's not the same thing. Those aren't apples to apples comparison. And so I think even if you look at the historical evidence that it doesn't, it goes back to Milton Friedman. Don't judge a policy by its intentions, but by its results. And while their intentions may have been good, I happen to not agree with it, but the results show that it didn't work.
So I don't understand. I generally just don't understand the fears evinced by Navarro, the president,
Lighthizer.
Yeah. I mean, they say, we have these chronic trade deficits and they're hurting us. How? Like, I question the basic premise, because I don't see how we've been hurt by the trade deficit. We all know that that's also a surplus of investment funds. So
right.
There are two sides to this coin, and evaluate them both. It just doesn't look like it's been damaging to the United States. So I don't understand the claim.
Yeah.
I also don't think it's measured right. So a thing that we do is the equivalent of providing a checking account to the world. Now, we value our checking accounts because they provide us with some liquidity. We can go and make a purchase, and we can always make those transactions happen because we have a little money in the checking account.
Yeah.
That's a service that we value. Do we get charged for that service? Not usually. That's something that doesn't show up on literally the exchange between you and your bank. So there's no line that says liquidity services, $15 a month.
Yeah.
In the same way, there's no accounting in the international financial statistics for the liquidity services we are providing to the world with U.S. Treasuries. They are the foundation of the global financial system. You can transacting them anytime. You can put money in them for a short time, take them back out. And that's a service that's being exported by the United States to every other country. The value of those exports probably are pretty big. And I don't know if you counted all of the things, including that service trade, the trade deficit might not be very large at all.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a great point. It really is. Going back to your point about why are they doing this? I mean, one of the things I did when I was driving to DC and we lived in McLean, Virginia. We had 2 kids at the time. We have 3 kids now. But I remember when we were driving, we took 2 separate cars. And so I was in my car and I was listening to Peter Navarro's Death by China because I really wanted to have a better understanding of like, why is it that they're going in this direction so much? And it goes back to your point. Like, I really don't think it's about the trade deficit. I think that is what sounds good and then what they like to put out there to the public to try to get people on their side. But at least from Navarro's perspective is that they think it's an existential threat, that China really is somehow going to take over the world with their ideas. And so we've got to push back every way we can. And in doing so, we should do through tariffs or any other means. And it goes back to the intentions versus results. Let's say those are good intentions. The results just don't do that. I mean, as you know, Doug, like whenever you put tariffs on a country, it changes the trade flow of dollars as well, which appreciates the dollar.
Yep.
And when you do that, the exact amount of the tariff is almost the same appreciation you get of the dollar. So therefore, it doesn't make it more expensive to buy the Chinese goods. And in fact, that's why the deficit kept going up. Is that it didn't change up the fundamental dynamics. And by the way, I don't think that China and their communist government really care about their people as much because they don't have elections.
Yeah, they don't.
They don't change up their trade practices that way. I really think the better way to go about this, and I've made this comment a lot, but I really think that we should stop pointing our fingers at China and other countries because we have 3 that are pointing back at ourselves. We need to do a better job of getting our own fiscal house in order. And lowering corporate taxes, deregulating, making ourselves more competitive. That way we can compete with China. And oh, by the way, I think we should also have more free trade agreements with our allies. What do you think about that?
I agree with that completely. It's been a long time since a president's requested trade promotion authority.
Yeah.
Been a long time since there's been any significant attempt to lower barriers to market access.
Well, it was Obama, right?
And that was the central thrust of post-World War II U.S. international economic involvement. I still believe that that's a good model for the United States. I get it that the WTO became an unwieldy bureaucratic entity that produced lots of frustration all around. It's not that you want to defend the status quo of things like that, but the idea of better trade, producing better relationships, I think is dead on the market. And I'd like to pursue that.
Yeah. And one other thing here, and we can move on to something else, but I also like, cause you don't know a whole lot about my background, but basically I got in a bad car accident and it kind of turned my life around I was a hard rock drummer in Houston, Texas for a while. And anyway, that changed me and I got a PhD in economics and a first generation college student and all that fun stuff. And I feel like my calling is to let people prosper. And that let people prosper isn't just Americans. It's the Chinese, it's the Indians. I mean, it's the whole globe people in general. And I think too often here lately, we're focused so much on the America first idea that we forget that trade also benefits people across the globe.
Absolutely. And it's a very easy shorthand to talk about China as if China was a monolith. But the reality is there have been several different stages of the evolution of China over time. And there was a stage prior to the Beijing Olympics, which was a big turning point in my view, where there were real attempts to listen to the voice of the population. There were real attempts to instill more market mechanisms. And those go hand in hand with personal freedoms that they have trouble with. And ultimately, Xi took another direction. Re-centralized, politicized it. And that's not a direction I support. It's a very different China, much more dangerous to itself and to others than it used to be. But that in the era prior to that, China was one of the great anti-poverty programs of all time. Yeah, it was shocking. I mean, we're talking billions of people that are off.
Correct.
And that was an accomplishment. and should have been celebrated widely.
Yeah, totally agree. Great point. Well, another thing that I get in your email every day, American Action Forum, y'all should all go subscribe. I'll put it in the show notes page. But one thing that I love so much is the final regulatory costs, where y'all go through and compare these between different presidents. You know, we had for a while it was Obama, Trump, and Biden, and you could see throughout the same time span within their presidency what those final rule costs would be. And Obama, you know, was pretty high at that time. Trump for a while was a little high, but then would come back down. And I think at the end of the day was nearly flat, maybe a little bit higher at the end. But under Biden was $1.8 trillion, I think was the latest number.
Stunning.
And
I mean,
and this is a hidden tax on Americans that I don't think we quite understand, but like just us sitting in these rooms, there's regulations on the lights. There's regulations all around us. There's NEPA on our cars. There's tons of regulations. But anyway, I love this stuff that y'all are doing, Doug, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to explain it.
So the genesis of this is actually this simple. So I was on the McCain campaign, and it turns out if you lose the election, didn't think about this. If you lose the election, you're unemployed.
Yeah,
that's an insight.
Yeah,
I'm like, okay, what am I going to do with myself here? And I had arrived at a couple of things. Number one, I'd been commuting for a long time. My kids had finally graduated from high school. Yeah. They were both in D.C. My son had bought a house down in Alexandria. My daughter was going to American University. I thought, I'm going to be here. Okay, so I need a job here. I didn't want to be an academic. So no, not Georgetown, not GW. I was done with that life.
Yeah.
And I thought, I don't want to have a boss either. Okay. So I'm going to start my own thing. And I'd been thinking about starting the American Action Forum and its sister organization for a while. I finally decided it was a good idea, and I went ahead and got some help, and I'll leave out all the details in there. But we're up and running. I've got one employee, a fantastic colleague named Cameron Smith. And she says to me, she goes, I have a friend named Sam. Sam's a lawyer. He's out of work right now. Is there anything Sam could do? He'd like to just come in. And I said, sure. So Sam Batkins comes to AF, and I said, Sam, I'm a trained public finance economist. I understand tax policy, budget policy. I don't know anything about regulation, but I think it's really important. Can you take a look at the regulations and let's figure out what we can do that's comparable to taxes?
Yeah. Sam
is the original genius behind the regulation rodeo and the efforts that have been continued by Dan Bosch and now Dan Goldbeck.
Yeah.
And so Sam was talking to me, come up with different ideas, and he came up with the idea of let's start calculating what does it cost for these final rulemakings when they're imposed on Americans, the paperwork hours and the burden. And he deserves all the credit for that.
Wow.
And, it has been one of our most popular and enduring products. It gets more citations on the floor of the Senate and the House than any other single thing we've ever done.
Yeah.
And I'm very proud of it, but I can't pretend I thought it up.
No,
Not really.
okay.
I know somebody who understood it should do this. And Sam figured it out.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I know it helps me a lot. And I'm more like you. I'm more of a public finance. I do a lot of budgeting, the state, federal, and local levels, and spending limits is a big thing for me. And, I'll talk about that here in a minute. But the regulations, I don't know. I didn't really know how to dig into it because I would love to see the final rule cost and the things that you are doing there. And one of the things that I think would be great one day, speaking of us who are more public finance, right, fiscal guys, is what if we had a regulatory budget? Or is there one?
It's it. There's a lot of chatter about these numbers. So again, if you go back, Obama, over 8 years, $890 billion of regulatory costs. So that's about $100 billion a year in stealth taxation. Mm-hmm. And I've for one thought that was one of the reasons we came out of the Great Recession so poorly. Just keep whacking the economy with a $100 billion tax increase.
Yeah.
President Trump comes in and the language is one in, two out. But the reality is that OMB through OIRA has gone to each of the agencies and says, here's your budget. This is what you can do to the American private sector this year. You can impose this much in regulatory costs. If you do any more, you got to take something out. And so that was the discipline, the budgeting on it. And those numbers were all zeros and negative numbers. Those were their budgets. And I, a seasoned dweller of the Washington swamp, said there is no way this is not going to happen. And it didn't happen the first year. There were $10 billion of regulatory costs. Now, $100 billion a year to 10 is like night and day. And I'm telling you, the business community noticed it. Yeah. It mattered enormously. But the next year it was negative. third year it was negative. Then the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
There were some costly regulations in the name of the public health mission. But for his 4 years, President Trump had something like $30 to $40 billion total.
Yeah.
890, 40. Right. I mean, you figure it out. It was unbelievable. Yeah. And so now, they've done this before. He has many of the same people back at OMB. They're going to run this playbook again. He has now used the language 1 in, 10 out, but they've broadened the scope of things to include guidance memos and things like that. So I'm really quite sure that we're going to see, again, just an enormous amount of regulatory relief from this administration. And that'll be a great thing for the business sector. Yeah,
totally. I think to your point, during the first administration, Trump administration, we had the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and we saw some, faster economic growth in what CBO, speaking of CBO, was projecting over time. And, I think we got a big hit or a big boost from the TICJA, is what we call it in DC, but the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. But it was in tandem with that deregulation. I mean, I think the corporate tax rate cut was huge. I mean, going from 35% to 21%. The individual ones were good, but I mean, you didn't get the larger economic benefits from that like you did the corporate tax cuts. But I think the deregulation was a huge part of that. And one of the things whenever I was at OMB, because you have the team of PhD economists and everything else that are working on these big macro models. We started also pricing in the tariffs. Speaking of tariffs earlier in the trade wars, and we found a drag of about 0.5 percentage point from the trade wars, which of course we had to kind of bury in our reporting some, as you can understand. But the deregulation was definitely giving us more of a boost in economic growth, and I think we saw during the Biden years is, there wasn't really a lot of changes in the tax code itself. But 1.8, nearly $2 trillion in hidden taxes, stealth taxes, as you put through regulation, was just huge.
Yeah. and it's just not well appreciated.
Yeah.
If you look at the NFIB Small Business Optimism Index, we'll see these two enormous spikes associated with the election of Donald Trump. And that is just the regulatory relief. They can see it coming. They're thrilled. And it matters a lot to the business community.
Yeah.
I thought in the first term, Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, regulatory relief, a pretty sound spending bill that funded the Pentagon appropriately for the first time in a long time. That trifecta powered the economy. And then when he picked a trade war with China, it slowed noticeably.
Yeah.
And I've always been nervous about the tariffs and their implications since then. I think what we're seeing now is the real possibility that having stacked them in a different order, they're really going to learn how detrimental those tariffs are.
Yeah. And too, Doug, I mean, given that, they should not have put tariffs out first. They should have got the tax cuts and jobs out first, the permanent or extensions, whatever they're going to do, and then go to this if they wanted to. I would advise them not to, but then do that. And also this on again, off again, like even folks who I think are on the sides of tariffs, they're like, what the heck's going on? Because you talk to businesses and they're like, well, I don't know what to do. Should I wait? Should I buy now? And so that uncertainty has really led to a lot of other economic effects as well, don't you think?
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I was just at two different business conferences giving talks, and people asked me the same question in disguised form about 50 times, which was, okay, what's the larger strategy here with the on again, off again, maybe bigger, smaller? There's a plan for that, right? I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
To be honest, I don't. I'm not privy to that. But you're worried about it because everyone else is worried about it, and it's impacting the economy. There's no way around it.
Yeah. Yep. No, that's right. Okay. So as we're wrapping up here, I also want to get your thoughts kind of on the budgeting. Running these massive deficits, $1 trillion in net interest payments on the debt and everything else that's going on. As a budget hawk for a number of years that I've known you, what's your thoughts right now? What are you kind of giving in and like what are you sharing with business folks and others that we should be doing right now?
Well, we should be fixing it.
Yeah.
But we're not. I mean, we really aren't, and we won't until we decide to address Social Security and Medicare.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, we're going to.
Yeah.
But and for the listeners, here's the boring budgetary reality. But remember, I don't have a soul. There's some debate about whether it was missing at birth or surgically removed, but it's not there. And so I just talk about these programs as if there are no people in them, but there are. But here's the programs. Social Security and Medicare are big. Those two programs will be more than 1/2 of all non-interest spending over the next 10 years.
Wow. Yeah.
That's the money.
Yeah.
They're growing faster than everything else. Social Security at 5.5, Medicare at about 7 in those projections. The reason that matters is that we're going to have revenues grow about as fast as the economy. So if we get 2% real and 2% inflation or 2.5% inflation, whatever it might be, we're going to get revenue growth at a 4 to 4.5% rate. Well, if you got 5.5 and 7 beating 4.5 every year, the gap's just widening.
Yep.
And that's the problem.
Yeah.
And so you will not deal with the ever widening deficits and ultimately the debt until you get Social Security and Medicare to grow more slowly. I'm not here to hack them to pieces, but you do have to take some reforms and get them to grow more slowly. That's all there is to it. We're not doing that. We're doing other things. And so my hope is that we do not dramatically worsen the fiscal outlook in the next couple of years, but we will have to now turn to fixing it. And the reason we'll have to is, as you know, Social Security has a trust fund, an accounting mechanism, which when it hits zero by law, they can't pay full benefits. And there will have to be some changes in the Social Security law. That will happen within the next 10 years, probably in about 8 years. That means that we're doing Social Security reform somewhere in the next 10 years. That means if you're 55 and you're trying to retire in 10 years, you don't know what your benefit's going to be.
Yeah.
That's a terrible way to run a pension.
Yeah.
Like, you'd be allowing people who are 55 to make a plan, and they can't. But that's the good news for budget hawks like me. Increasingly, instead of going home to a town hall and saying, I'd like to reform Social Security, and then being asked to go work at the Tasty Freeze, they're going to go back to that same town hall, and they're going to say, hey, when are you going to fix Social Security? I'd like to know what the deal is for me. So the pressure will flip from don't touch it to touch it.
Yeah.
And that's good, because once you touch the biggest pillar in the social safety net, you're going to have to touch Medicare, you're going to have to touch Medicaid, you're going to have to touch them all, because you can't just single out seniors in their program. You got to spread it out. So that's good. We need a thorough going review of our spending that changes the trajectory of these really big autopilot programs.
Yeah.
And that's got to happen.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it was one of the things in the first Trump administration, right? He came in, he said, look, we're not going to touch Social Security and Medicare, and those are off the table. And so we were preparing in the second term, if there had been, to do something along those lines. I was hopeful that given this second term, they would talk about it more, but he kind of took it off the table a little bit. I know they're trying to make some tweaks here and there, but it almost seems like it's off the table again, unfortunately.
Well, yeah, I mean, he did say on the campaign trail, I'm not going to touch Social Security.
Exactly.
And so that's that. He has since said they're not going to touch Medicaid in the reconciliation. So, there's not enough left to make a really significant permanent alteration of the outlook. And that's just the arithmetic truth. So they should do the best tax bill they can and get as much pro-growth tax policy into the mix as that is possible, and come back for another run at the spending at another time. Yeah.
Great points. Well, as both of us being deficit hawks and spending hawks, trying to rein in spending as much as possible, I think we'll probably be told that we don't have a soul. I even have red hair. So, I guess I don't have a soul. What little is left anyway, after all these years of working on federal budgets, as you know. But, it's always good to talk to you about these things. I think we need to have more of these honest conversations, because one of the things that I feel like on the right is we're so caught up in this populism and populist debates that they want to tell people what they want to hear, but the reality is going to come home to roost whether we like it or not, right?
So I like your show, which I've been on now once, because of the title, because it is about letting people prosper.
Yeah,
people are responsible for their own prosperity, and they are capable of their own prosperity. And one of the things that I don't like about Washington right now is on both sides of the aisle, they're real sure they have the answer and they can tell the American people how to go live their lives. And I don't like that a bit.
No.
And, getting back to letting people prosper and choose their future is exactly the right thing.
Yeah. Amen. Well, Doug, thank you so much for joining me today on the show. Keep up the great work that you are doing at American Action Forum and all the great work that you've done. God bless you and your family, and I hope you'll be on again sometime.
I would love that. Thanks for having me.
All right. So thank you so much, Doug. And for the audience, I hope you enjoyed our conversation. We've got a lot to learn and understand about the truth that's going on in fiscal policy, trade policy, and so much more. Be sure to go and check out Doug Holtz-Eakin over at American Action Forum. I'll put this in the show notes page. Remember, you can find information at vanceginn.com and my show notes and much more at vanceginn.substack.com. But until next time, let people prosper.